Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last of our virtual wine tastings. We've made it this far. We've gone through 13 of our 2019 and 2020 vintages, and now I think we got another 7 wines today, then we will have made it. So it's pretty exciting and great to have all of you back. I think we're just getting the last few folks into the waiting room here and into the show. Boy, I know we have people on from around the country, but if you were anywhere near the Napa Valley or in California today, we had one for the textbooks here. What a beautiful day. Temperatures in the 70s. The mustard is out. We have a full tasting rooms. It feels so good to be at least open outside for tasting, and the picnic grounds are just covered with visitors. Anyway, a great sight to see. Well, just welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to my panel of experts. We're getting pretty good at this, I think. So welcome back, Brooks Painter, Director of Winemaking. Marc Golick, our now Director of Wine and Food Pairings. I like that.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Good to see you, Marc. Bob Cuozzo, Manager of the Cellar Club Tasting Room. Good to see you, Bob. And then, of course, Jason Moravec, our winemaker. Jason, good to see you.
Hello.
And then, of course, John Winkelhaus, Executive Vice President. Good to see you, John.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see everybody.
Okay, we're going to get basically into the shows. We got a lot of wines to taste and to talk about today. But just quickly, hopefully everyone has poured their samples, have them in your glasses, and they're getting aired out. We're going to jump into them in about 2 seconds. But just wanted to remind you that I know if you have questions, please use the chat function. Please chat to Sattui Winery virtual wine tasting. Allie's on the board. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And of course, we can answer them live for you during the show. So please don't hesitate to jump in because we're covering a lot of different wines and different vineyards. So I'm sure you'll have some questions about that. And then tonight we have two new videos to share with you. And one, we're really excited to share the Black Sears video. We're going to have Ashley Sears will be talking about her family's vineyard. Brooks will be up in the vineyard as well. We taped him there talking about the magic of Black Sears. And then also Joe Ramazzotti talking about the famous Ramazzotti vineyards. So I think we have a great show. I think we're ready to get into this tasting. And so the first wine today will be our 2019 Syrah. And let's put this out to Wink. I know that you've always been a big fan of our Syrahs. Please tell us about this wine and what you're tasting in it.
Well, thanks, Tom. And this is the 2019 Napa Valley Syrah. So it has had a little bit of age in the barrel. So I think Jason and Brooks are just about ready to pull it out of the cellar club and start making their blends up of the wine. And I'll let Jason kind of talk about the 3 different sources of the Syrah, but they're all estate-owned vineyards as well. And the wine spent, I guess, about 1.5 years in oak. I think that's right, Brooks. And the best thing about this is just this inky color. I really love the deeply scented and fruity aromatics. Little hints of violet. It's really full-bodied. It's got a succulent mid-palate.
This
really
wine,
layers of flavors and supple tannins. So, a little bit black pepper, baking spice, some smoked meats, perhaps. It's for me, it's like complex magic on the nose and the palates. Really, really wonderful.
Yeah, why does this wine sell so well for us, John? Syrah has just been a big part of our portfolio. What is it, do you think, that folks enjoy about this wine?
Well, I think I just described it a little bit in the taste and things, but I think it's artfully crafted, and it's a great food wine. Cabernet sometimes can be a little bit more angular in the feel, in the mouthfeel. I find our Syrah to be more smooth, really finely grained tannins. And comparatively, it's a great value to many Cabernets. It's something that can be enjoyed young You don't have to cellar it, but a couple months after the bottling, it can be enjoyed. But certainly the cellaring doesn't hurt it at all as well. So really versatile wine. And congratulations to Brooks and Jason on building this wine. It's really fabulous.
Well, let's get a winemaker's perspective from this wine. Jason, you and Brooks have been crafting this wine for a number of years. What, as you taste this young wine, a year old, and I have to tell you, I'm amazed about how well this wine tastes today. It's crazy. Why is that?
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for describing it, John. It's you described it very well. We really enjoy making this wine. It really comes down to 3 different vineyards that can end up going into this wine, and they are all in Napa Valley. So if you take one of the cooler regions of Napa Valley, which is Carneros, or right next to it, Mount Veeder, that's where our Hibbard Ranch is, and that's where some of the blend will come from. And then as you travel up north, you get to a warmer area where our Carsey Vineyard is, and that's closer to Yountville. And then finally, you get to the warmest region that we grow Syrah, which is right next to the winery, and that's our Vittorio's Vineyard. So each of these regions kind of brings a whole different layer of Syrah to the table, where the warmer regions really focus on the fruit, so blackberry and plum. And then the moderate temperatured climate will bring in some of that earthy chocolate, some of that cherry. And then the cooler region of Mount Veeder will start bringing in some of that licorice or truffle, earthy, dusty. It can all come from this one variety, just planted in several different growing regions.
Are you convinced then that by having the palette of these 3 different vineyards in 3 different locations, that you're able to craft a much more complex style of Syrah than if we were just harvesting just from one of those vineyards?
Exactly. Yeah. So we keep them all separate for a majority of their life before they go together, and we can taste them individually, and we can kind of craft them towards one way or the other. And so sometimes we'll have some more Carsey than the other vineyards, and some years we'll have more Vittorios. I want to say this 2019 that we're tasting right now has actually more of the Vittorio's vineyard in it. So it's leaning more towards that warmer climate type of a Syrah.
Yeah, well, it's delicious. Well, Marc, we talked a lot last night about entanglement. We've talked about Grenache. Now we're finally made it to the Syrah, and I know all 3 of these wines are favorites of yours. How does Syrah fit into your food pairings and your enjoyment of these Rhone varieties?
Well, what I really love about Syrah is that it is still, really upfront, bright and luscious and fruity, but it has more depth and more character and a longer lasting, more richer earthen finish than some of the lighter reds like the Grenache that's singled out. So this is a perfect wine for this time of year when we are in, well, kind of barring today, I think we had low 70s here, but the cooler weather and having the stews and the roasts and those deeper, richer, fattier, more luscious meals pair perfectly with wines like this Syrah.
And so would you use, so you would look for something a little bit more full flavored when pairing with Syrah versus entanglement, or can those 2 be kind of paired with a lot of the same types of foods?
I look at entanglement, that blend has a lot more versatility for even being more of what we just call a porch wine, a standalone drink a glass of. Syrah can be that as well, and ours certainly is gentle enough. But as food pairing, I'd really like to complement it with something that's rich and more fatty to just bring a little bit more harmoniousness to the depth of this wine.
Yeah, well, anyway, it's been a great favorite of ours, and I have to tell you, for this wine being a year old, it's just unquestionably, it's just so delicious now. It's hard to believe it's still in the barrel. Well, the next wine we'd like to get to is Petite Syrah. And I know this has always been kind of a cult favorite here at V Sattui. And Bob, I know a lot of your fans really down in our members room really enjoy this wine. And I'm sure all of you at home, if you've just poured this in your glass, I'm sure you're just amazed by how darkly colored this wine is. And when you taste this wine, Bob, what kind of components are you picking up?
Getting a lot of dark fruit, nice tannins. It's very rich. It's a small grape, very thick skin, and that's the reason for the dark color. Big tannins, but Brooks and Jason, thank you for making my job easy. You make these wonderful wines, and they're just so delicious. I get a little bit of currant flavors, a little bit of licorice. It's almost like the Syrah, but notched up a little bit. And it's just another fine wine for meats and stews and lamb chops and all that good fatty food.
Why do you think this is such a fan favorite? I mean, I mentioned the word cult, but I mean, it just seems that people that like Petite Syrah, just like Petite Verdot, I mean, you know, and then I think Cab Franc was one that we talked about earlier on the Bordeaux show. These are wines, I think it's just that if people like these wines, they really like them. And so what is it about Petite Syrah that fits into this category?
Well, once again, these are all varietals that people aren't used to. You know, it's usually the Cabernet, the Merlot, the Chardonnay. They're used to those because you see them everywhere. These wines, Malbecs, Cab Francs, you hear about them, but you don't really get to taste them that often. And so I, for one, when people are trying the futures here, I say you have to try these because they are so delicious. And if you don't know them, you really need to know them. And this particular one is just so full bodied. So when they like their Cabernets, it's like, here, you really got to try one of these because it's a little less money than the Cabs, but it's got that full richness that you're looking for. And once they try it, they go, oh my God, this is so jammy, it's delicious. And they end up buying them.
You know, as we just talked about a moment ago, the color in this wine is just amazingly black. You know, Brooks, when we taste this is young wine's a year old, but when we're tasting these in our tasting groups and we're blending them, I'm always busted when I come back to the office because in my lips, my teeth, my tongue is stained purple. You know, what is with Petite Syrah that just has such a black color to it?
Well, of course, it goes back to the origin of the grape itself and the amount of pigments that are produced, known as anthocyanins. Anthocyanins are responsible for the dark reddish, purple, and even black tones that you might get depending on their concentration. So if you are using Petite Syrah standalone, it's just going to be a big, bold, inky wine. And of course, that's going to stain your teeth. I always like to brush my teeth immediately after our sessions so I don't get busted. But yeah, it's one of the advantages of having all that anthocyanin. You can give the grapes a little more hang time, pick them a little bit later. And that allows the skins to develop and soften. And when we do the fermentation and what we call the maceration of the skins, they are released more readily if it's a little riper and it's had a little more time in the vineyard. So this is a grape that we tend to push the maturity on.
You know, I have a couple more questions for you, Brooks. Here's something that I think our viewers would find interesting. You know, this is a big, powerful wine. We always say there's nothing petite about Petite Syrah. And you know, here you've made into 100% varietal wine, but in a lot of our blends, and you might want to speak to some of the other wines that we use Petite Syrah, and sometimes it might only be 1%, 2% or 5% of a blend. And here you are, you're able to craft this wine into 100% varietal, and yet it's not as, it's just not tannic. I mean, it's big and it has some huge flavors, but it's not overwhelming. And then the second part of that question is too, I know we source this from a couple really, maybe a few vineyard sources, and primarily two here in the Napa Valley. So maybe you could speak to those two special vineyards as well.
Sure. Well, as far as making a soft, round, and supple Petite Syrah, that's a challenge, certainly, because not only is it packed with color and anthocyanins, it's packed with tannins as well. And so during the extraction process of the grapes, as we're making the wine during the fermentation, we'll carefully manage the temperature of the fermentation, starting off fairly warm, even hot at the beginning, and then we'll gradually cool, and that helps us quench the extraction of the tannins. And we're tasting these wines on a daily basis, sometimes several times a day, trying to assess when it's ready to get off the skins. And that's the way I like my Petite Syrah: big, inky, black, but still soft and supple. And then to answer the second part of your question, Petite Syrah is a traditional variety that was planted back in the 1800s. And at the time, obviously, it's going to bring color and power in a field blend. A field blend might be comprised of several different varieties. Zinfandel was probably the most popular and might even be 85 to 90% of these field blends. So as you walk through these old vine vineyards, you'll come across a Petite Syrah grape here and there, a Carignan grape, Alicante Bouschet, and that was how they would bring complexity to the wine, but pick it all on the same day. And our other varieties or other bottlings that we use this in is which one of my favorites is the La America and the Baci. Those are designed to have really great texture, deep color. La America as a tribute to our immigrant past. When a lot of these old vineyards were being planted, many were planted by Italian or European immigrants. And so it was their choice to make these field blends. And so La America were attempting to recreate some of those age-old styles and as a tribute to the country's immigrant past.
Well, it's what a great nod to our history, and we're able to take these old varieties and craft them in a new way. And that's what's so exciting, that you're able to do that. And for those that have not tried our La America, it's a delicious wine. It's become a big seller for us as well. Well, another question I'd like to, and maybe this one directed to Jason, and there might be some people wondering, what's the difference between Petite Syrah and Syrah? I mean, they're spelled a little bit differently, but is there any relation at all, or they just happen to sound the same?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good question, and I think that it comes up a lot just because they sound the same and they're spelled a little bit different. Is there a connection? First off, these are two very distinctively different varieties. They are not the same, which is different than when you're talking about Syrah versus Shiraz. Those are the same variety, just kind of grown in different locations, where Shiraz is from Australia and Syrah is from anywhere from around here. But Petite Syrah and Syrah are different varieties, and they also taste very, very different. Syrah has more of a medium body, medium tannin, medium acidity, whereas Petite Syrah has high tannin, high acidity. It's just more intense. Syrah has looser clusters and more of a moderate flavor intensity. And whereas Petite Syrah has these tighter clusters, and they're very small, and they're very concentrated and inky and dark. So they're very, very different. But that being said, they are also related in a way, because Syrah is one of the parents of Petite Syrah. And so there are connections to them where you can kind of get some of the similar fruits between the two varieties. But that cross did enough to really make it a big change in how it's perceived on the palate.
We just got a question from Dale and Debbie Todd, and they would like to know if tannins are related to a wine's youth. How would you answer that?
Yeah, so tannins are originally found in the skins. And so they are extracted out of the skins during fermentation. And as a winemaker, we are very conscious of how much tannin we are pulling out of the skins. We could just leave it on skins for a really, really long time and extract as much as we can, but then the wine would be very bitter. And so we monitor this very closely and we pull the wines off of skins once we get to the tannin level that we want. Now, at this point, you're given a set amount of tannins. We're not really adding very much more tannin, a little bit from oak tannins, but it's a little bit different type of tannin. And so a young wine would have the most astringent, biggest tannins when it first comes out of the fermenter and then in the bottle when we first release it. And then as the wine ages, these tannin molecules actually combine with other tannin molecules and become larger molecules. And that's what makes them actually taste softer on our palate because they're just larger molecules. And so that's really what we're tasting and as the wine ages. And so it's the same tannins, they just are morphing and changing.
That's really interesting. Well, look, Marc, we have Super Bowl coming up tomorrow, and we have Petite Syrah that we're tasting. If we were to be drinking Petite Syrah during Super Bowl, what would you pair with that?
Well, you know, it's always kind of a tough crossover to get people into the wine world on Super Bowl day being such a beer holiday, I think. But it, you know, in years past in the wine and food pairing program here, we've done something called Elevate Your Tailgate, which really tried to get people into the idea that, hey, wine and Super Bowl food could be all right, if not even better than doing it with beer. And one of the things that I did with Petite Syrah was some slow roasted brisket nachos. And to have that gaminess from the brisket to mirror with that slight earthiness in the finish of this wine and some of the spices along with that. I mean, it was an absolute knockout and nobody really expected. I mean, I think we just worded it as nachos on the menu, you know, and when it came out, my God, just perfect with a wine like this.
Yeah, and so beyond that, so barbecued ribs. I mean, it just seems like this wine could just stand up to about anything. Is that true?
As long as it's not something as delicate as, say, you know, like chicken, but if we're talking red meats, if we're talking the game meats especially, that's where Petite Syrah really shines. So if you've got a hunter in your life and you've got some duck or you've got some elk and things like that really feast on that kind of forest floor, that earthy nature food that they eat, those are the flavors that are going to come out in the meats as well. And so it's an absolute perfect complement with Petite Syrah.
And before we jump to the Zinfandels, I'd like to just jump back to Jason. Is Petite Syrah a wine that you can lay down and age? Is this something if people were to buy this as features and keep it for 10 years, is that the highest and best use, or should you drink it a little sooner than that?
So the way, like I was saying with the tannins, we really monitor the amount of tannins that we extract. It is drinkable upon release, but I gotta say, this is a very, very big, dark, deep, inky wine that can stand up to the test of time. So if you're looking for a wine that you want to see how a wine can age and age for a long time, this is a case to get, because you can try one now, you can try one 2 years from now, 10 years from now, and just keep on seeing how it progresses. So it's a really fun one to kind of experiment with the aging potential of wine.
That's great. Well, look, thank you, everyone that's chimed in on this wine. We're finally now into the last string of Zinfandels. And for this Zinfandel, we're going to head a little bit east up to Sierra Nevada foothills. And Brooks, would you please be so kind to introduce the 2020 Amador Ridge Zinfandel?
Sure. This is a wine that comes from, as Tom mentioned, about 1,000-foot elevation in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And it's grown just outside the town of Sutter Creek in Amador County. The vines were planted just around the end of the Second World War. I'm sure there's probably some older vines there as well. So it would be considered an ancient vine, or just on the cusp of an ancient vine vineyard. John Murrell farms this. He's had the property for quite a number of years, and there's a great shot of John and the old vines that he farms over there. This is 100% Zinfandel vineyard. And so we were talking about blending opportunities for Petite Syrah. We will often consider putting in some Petite Syrah into all of our Zinfandels. It tends to add a little more structure, a little more weight, and a little more color. And so these are often one of the first Zinfandels that we harvest, depending on the characteristics of the climate in that particular year. And so it comes in often at the end of August when we're still just tuning up all of our winemaking equipment for harvest. And John and his son always attend our barrel futures parties. Many of you have probably had a chance to talk to them in the past. It's a gorgeous area, certainly warm, and so it makes a very open, round wine, but it still has plenty of color and texture.
You know, Brooks, and pardon me, I misspoke. This is actually 2019. This is tasting so good right now. Brooks, how would you compare, I mean, this appellation, Amador, compared to a Napa or a Dry Creek or Russian River? It's a unique appellation, isn't it?
Well, it is. It has very cool nights because you're above the Central Valley, but very warm and even hot days. And when you swirl this in your glass, at least I get a nice jammy note, almost blackberry jam that you might get. So these grapes are very, very ripe at harvest. Even though they're early in the season, they tend to be, that rich jammy note that you get from the Amador.
Was delicious. Well, Wink, I know this is another favorite of yours. What are you tasting this wine, and why is this one of your favorites?
Well, when I put it to my nose, if you're not catching a great big slug of black pepper, you're missing it, because it's got some black pepper and really dark fruit as well. It's one of my favorites, Tom, because it's a wine that I love to share with out of the barrel with our members, or maybe our members that want to be members. It's a great vineyard designate to new to Zinfandel folks. It's jammy, as Brooks said, but it's also complex, and I like sharing it because a lot of people that taste Zinfandels for the first time think you only make white Zinfandels, and it's kind of funny that way. And so I get a lot of remarks from guests that think that say this wine is juicy, easy drinking, jammy, complex, with little hints of black pepper on that as well. Marc, you getting that same feeling from it as well?
I do love this wine, and being up, it's kind of it's a singular one for me that really stands alone from the others, being in that neck of the woods, and to have the super, really hotter temperatures in the day, but then to get so much cooler at night. And I think you get that great jam expression balanced out with the spices. And that's the part that I really do like about it.
Yeah, it's a great wine. And the critics love this wine as well. I'm going to jump past the kind of the earlier ones, but just tell you a little bit, if I may, Tom, about the Wine Enthusiast for the 2014 gave it 91 points, but the 2015 did even better with a gold medal from the Chronicle. And the Wine Enthusiast, here's the telling tale here. It was the editor's choice and 93 points. And so that's saying something about our Zinfandels and the craft of both Brooks and Jason on this wine. And not to be left out, the 2016, another gold medal from the Chronicle, 90 points from the Con Guide, and then the 2017 received 92 points from Ken's Wine Guide and Wine and Spirit. And the current 2018 release is sporting a nice 90 points from California Grapevine. So these are pretty notable publications that have a lot of competition from really good Zinfandels throughout California, which is of course the home to Zinfandels, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we're going also head to head with a lot of wineries that their home is in Amador County.
Yeah.
So for us to get a truckload of this fruit down here into the Napa Valley, into our winery, and to make it into a world-class wine is amazing. Well, Mark, I know you're probably busy texting someone there, but this
Recipe questions.
this question's for you. We make so many different Zinfandels. Do you often find it a challenge to pair these wines that, we have so many different styles and appellations, and, so I think each one probably deserves its date as to how you would pair it.
It really does, and a lot of people do ask me that question, like, okay, 13 ZINS, they can't all be so diverse, and they really are. I mean, I think we're covering 6 different counties, if I'm counting correctly. And I mean, there's from young to ancient vines. Every one of these has a character that's so unique to itself. So being as spoiled as I am, surrounded by them all the time, I can really get nitpicky, into which one that I want to use with which specific dish. And then, as many of you guys know, and if you tuned in last night, you heard, I mean, Qualia Zin is always my multifunctional, as what we kind of called earlier, a porch wine. But as to some of these others, and then coming up, in this lineup tonight, are some of the ZINs that we make that I really just look for specific pairings to really complement what they're highlighting the most.
If I could just add something, this wine is a great example of how you can see the wine evolve just in your glass in a couple of minutes. My first impression was, really dark, concentrated, jammy. Now it's opening up with some mocha, cinnamon, and black raspberry. And I think those cool nights, as Marc was saying, it retains the acidity, and so it's still a black fruit, but more of a raspberry than cherry or blackberry. So it's fun to just pour them and come back to them, several times through the night, or several glasses through the night, and see how it evolves. And of course, this is why we let wines breathe. So you can let it breathe in the glass, or you can let it breathe in the bottle, or decant it into a decanter. And that will open up the aroma and the flavors, allow it to develop in a fairly short period of time.
Well, and I'm sure everyone that's out there is tasting this wine right now. Absolutely right on with that mocha kind of cinnamon that really does come through in this wine, and it wasn't showing a little while ago. So that's pretty fun. This is cool stuff. Well, Bob, why don't you take this wine home for us? This is, I know, another popular wine down in the members' room. What are some of the comments that you get from our fans on this wine?
So usually when they ask for something a little more fruit forward, we'll either go with this or the Pilgrim or the Gilson, because that's the first thing that gets to you, versus like a Black Sears where you get the pepper first and then the fruit. So this is more for the fruit forward fans, I think. It's once again nice and light, not super heavy tannins, and this is one. It's not as popular as some of the like Ramazzotti Qualia. It's a nice hidden gem, if you ask me. So if you're looking for something a little fruit forward, but it's got the spice, then this is a nice one. Ribs, pepperoni pizza, a steak with this. It'll hold up to most foods.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, this is one that shouldn't be overlooked.
Yeah.
And just as Wink was saying, it's gotten some great reviews, editor's choice, wine enthusiast. I mean, I think that's some serious accolades there. And so, yeah, I know we have some all-time favorites here, but yeah, don't overlook this wine.
Yeah. It's tough when you have 13 of them. Everybody's got their favorites, but they're all delicious. It's just, try them all. I try to get everybody to take a case of something they haven't had before. Try it. You'll like it.
Right on.
Very
Right
good.
on, Bob.
Well, look, so now we're going to head west. And so we've been up in the Sierra foothills, and now we're going to head west to Dry Creek. And this is where we make 3 different Zinfandels, 3 different vineyards. And so, Jason, let's talk a little bit about this. Is our first wine here. This is going to be our Mounts. Why don't you introduce that and talk about this wine?
Yeah, of course. All right, so we are moving on to the Mounts 2019. So this is one of our Dry Creek Valley Zinfandels. I think this one really stands out amongst the other 3 because there's a lot of history here. The Mounts family has actually been farming this property for over 70 years, and it spans over 3 generations. So they have a really great understanding of each of their varieties and their vineyard blocks, and how to work with them. So, I mean, hats off to them for creating some exceptional fruit for us to work with as winemakers. And one thing I think that they have is they have these rolling hills that are very intricate to try to farm. And you can kind of see here that they're very gentle sloping rolling hills. And they are also very old, ancient vine plants. So these plants are much older than some of the other Zinfandels, and you don't see old vines like this anymore. A lot of them are being pulled out, and so Sattui often goes and hunts these out, and we search for these, and we really want to make sure that we preserve some of this history, especially these ancient vines. I mean, the crop on these vineyards is so low. That's why people pull them out. So because it's an ancient vine, it really produces low fruit, which it focuses a lot of its energy into producing really intense flavors in that small amount of crop. And you can see that these 3 vineyards are pretty close together. It's Schoolhouse, Ramazzotti, and Mounts. They're all within, I'd say a mile of each other or so. And we do have when comparing it to the Amador Ridge, we are closer to the coast, so we will have a little bit more of a coastal influence. And this is going to give us those cool nights, but still very pretty moderate to warm days that allow for good ripening of the fruit. And these head-trained vines, you can see in that last photo there, the vines are head trained. So there's no trellis system to hold these up. They're kind of supporting themselves. And this is the older style of growing vines that you don't see very often anymore. And you only see them in these old ancient vines. And so it's totally a unique wine. Diving into the wine, I think this one has a lot of like earthy spice, chocolate, really great fruit in the nose.
Jason, isn't there a little bit of, or a good slug of Petite Syrah in this wine?
So that's another unique thing about Mounts is that they don't only grow Zinfandel, they grow multiple varieties. And so when we purchase fruit from them, we don't only get Zin, we also get Petite Syrah. And so we're not limited by that 5% of a different vineyard when going into this, because most of these wines that we're tasting here, they're going to be single vineyard. And so you can only go 95, it have to be 95% from that one vineyard. Whereas the Mounts, because we have Zinfandel for Mounts and Petite Syrah for Mounts, we're able to go past that 5% and a little bit more of another variety. And so you will get a lot of dark, deep flavors coming out of this wine, like we were tasting before, how that Petite Syrah is so inky and dark. Our mounts will often showcase a little bit more of that variety and make it a little bit of a bigger Zinfandel.
Well, and I think that's something that we've learned, Wink, when we bring this one out on the floor into our tastings. And we've learned that when we have released this, when it's fairly young, it's still a little bit tight. And I think it's because of that big slug of Petite. But then once it gets a couple of years in the bottle, what happens to that wine?
Well, it's the phrase, it opens up. I mean, it's a really well-made Zinfandel, but the Petite Syrah tends to tighten it a little bit. And I think this great site can age very nicely, and not only does the Petite Syrah open up, I think the Zinfandel opens up a little bit as well. So it has this has the structure to go probably a lot longer in terms of ageability than a lot of Zinfandels, and I think perhaps if you looked at 15 years, that probably wouldn't be out of the question. And if you're going to sell it for a while, probably wouldn't even open this up for 5 years. Not that I'm telling you to do that, but maybe 2-3 years down the road, I think you'll find it's a lot more interesting wine where those, it's going to be that mixed berry and full body, ripe and jammy wine with hints of spice as well. It's a highly structured, and I just want to let you know that the Spectator has rated wines from Sonoma as from 2014 to 2018 to drink or hold. So even they're saying that those wines from this area of Dry Creek are wines that you don't have to drink right away. In fact, if you go all the way back to 2004, Spectator's saying, well, you can still drink these. So that's a good slug of time as well. So Dry Creek Zins tend to, from Sonoma County, Dry Creek Zins tend to stand the test of time.
Well, and we often talk about drinking Zinfandels when they're young, and they're certainly very enjoyable. But please, if you've ever had a chance to lay down a Zinfandel, you will find in 10, 15 years, they almost take on what I would call a claret or even a Cabernet-like quality.
Yeah.
You really can lay down Zinfandels. And so please don't think that you have to drink them that young, because they really do age very uniquely. Well, to wrap up this wine, Marc, you're so good at pairing these wines. Okay, here's another challenge for you. How do you pair this Mounts Zinfandel with this pretty big slug of Petite Syrah?
And then, you know what, that is one of the things that I love about this particular Zin of ours, is that it has that Petite Syrah, which brings a lot more depth and finish and richness to the Zin experience. So you've got that ripe, racy, jammy fruit up front, but then a much longer lasting mid and finishing palate with a lot more structure to it. So to me, I look for things that are bold and rich and lively. And so, and I know, and I said it last night, we're kind of out of the season, but it doesn't matter to me if it's pouring down rain. I'll pop up the umbrella and march my way out to the barbecue. But this is my all-time matching up with that smoky, spicy, slathered, barbecue saucy like meals. I mean, it is just so perfect for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. We just saw a chat here from David Chadwick. It says these 4-ounce bottles are too small and tasting very well. And they are tasting great. Let me remind David, we spent about 2 weeks bottling 3,000 of these little bottles by hand, and every little label that you see in a bottle was hand applied. This was a labor of love for us here in January. It gave us something to do. We were closed, so it was fun to do that.
Hey, Tom, don't forget the bubble wrap.
Yeah, and then we had another whole team bubble wrapping every bottle. You know, I think we bought like 10 rolls of bubble. These rolls are huge. Anyway, it was an effort to get it to you. So hope everyone's appreciating our effort here to make this tasting, and it was fun to do. Well, look, the next wine I think many of you are excited to taste is our famous Black Sears Howell Mountain Zinfandel. Been a part of V. Sattui's history since I think the early 80s, 83, 84. And perhaps the best way to introduce this video is to hear from Ashley Sears and Brooks Painter in the vineyard. So let's bring them up, and I think you're gonna really enjoy this video.
Well, we are at one of the highest vineyards, if not the highest vineyards in the Napa Valley. We're at the top of Howell Mountain. We're currently at Black Sears Vineyard, about 2,800 feet above sea level.
My mom went to St. Helena High School and enjoyed life growing up here before it was wine country. When she met my dad, they met on a Sierra Club camping trip. He was the leader. Before they were married, she knew that she wanted to come back to this place. She felt it was a very special place. So they bought property together here on Howell Mountain before they were married. And that was partly because she wanted peace and quiet, and partly because she wanted peace and quiet for her child. This Zinfandel parcel, it was planted in 1975 by a couple from San Francisco. And when my parents purchased it in 1980, it was about 5 years old. The well went dry, no fencing, deer were eating everything, the rabbits were eating everything, and they called it the hard luck vineyard. Just wasn't turning out to be what that couple had hoped. So my parents actually purchased it thinking, you know, we don't like noise. We just would like to, you know, make sure that this little place stays quiet as well. And I guess we'll grow grapes. And yeah, I spent my childhood playing in the vineyard through the mustard season. It was very idyllic and beautiful, wonderful childhood. In 1984 was when Sattui made a Zinfandel that won a very prestigious award in Europe. And that was one of the first beginnings of our relationship through wine with this vineyard. A little bit about the vineyards. It was planted in 1975, and it was actually planted by our neighbor who is at the very end of the road, Bob March. And the clone is a Hain clone, which is a heritage vineyard Zinfandel in St. Helena.
The Hain Vineyard is a property down in St. Helena that was originally planted prior to the turn of the century, the late 1800s. And at the time, Napa Valley was known as much for prunes and walnuts as it was for grapes. But there were some people who really wanted to make some wonderful wines. And the Hain clone on the Hain property has unique characteristics in terms of its cluster size and what we call morphology. It tends to be very large. The berries are a little bit larger than you might find in some Zinfandels. It's very juicy, and it has this unique black pepper characteristic to the wine. It's head trained. The vines are spaced quite far apart, and no irrigation. The majority of the vineyard is dry farmed, which again adds to unique characteristics in the wine. Howell Mountain is quite a unique location, being well above the valley floor and mostly forested. There's huge fir trees, oak trees, madrones, and so you can see really quickly where the fertile soils are. And the optimum soil conditions for grapevines in Howell Mountain are a couple of the soil series we refer to as Aiken or Boomer, and what they have in common are a lot of volcanic origin. So they're often red colored. They have a lot of iron, and they all have a lot of nutrients. Over the last several decades, it's unfortunate, most of the old vine Zinfandel in Napa Valley has been removed and replanted to Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is the highest and best return for most growers. And if you're growing Cabernet and you can sell it for $75 to $100 a bottle versus Zinfandel for $35 to $45, obviously you're much better off with Cabernet. Unfortunately, that means that these old heritage Zinfandels that are so wonderful and have so much to offer, many of them have been replaced. So this particular vineyard is super rare right now. It's a real treat to be working with a vineyard like Black Sears and having the opportunity to make just a fabulous wine from some older vines. This has always been a favorite of ours at V. Sattui. And so, you know, we're approaching, what is it, 40 years of harvest from this vineyard, and it's one of our favorite Zinfandels.
For us to be able to continue that stewardship, really the wine and the grapes allow for us to do that and allow for us to raise our family here. I think it's my hope that for both for us and for Napa, that we can use that privilege of farming and winemaking in order to preserve what we love about Napa Valley.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that video. The sad part of this is that, you know, their 400-acre ranch, everything but the vineyards in their homes burned in the fire. And so really sad up there. I mean, of course, it'll come back, but the majesty of those redwoods and trees up there, it's going to take quite a while to come back. And we filmed that about you know, it was in October, so it's after harvest, and actually it was a pretty emotional time. But I think he actually was a great trooper and really committed to growing these grapes and for Zinfandel. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. So the big question is this, and this is often the debate here with each vintage of Black Sears, because we've been making it for 40 some years. Everyone has their comments. Well, is this year is the year for black pepper, or the black pepper was better, you know, from the 2013 vintage, on and on and on. So let's finally end this debate. Brooks and Jason, let's talk about the black pepper and why does that then vary from vintage to vintage?
Well, I'll start with that question. The Hain clone, as we described, is a fairly large cluster. And so there's often some green or pink berries. When the majority of the cluster is ripe and deep black, there can be a couple of pink berries hiding in the middle or the back of the cluster. And that's just a characteristic of this particular clone. And I think that will add to this spicy black pepper character. Some years we get a little more of it than others. We also are doing a little more thinning than perhaps in the past. And that thinning at Brazen, when we're taking off green clusters or shoulders on the main body of the cluster, that plays a role. Of course, it's the elevation, cool nights, the late season bloom and flowering of the vines because it's so cool in the spring. And it's also a northeast facing slope, which is considered a cool, much cooler than a southwest facing slope. So there's a bunch of different components that come to play. And Jason, you know, seeing the grapes on the crush pad, and we've discussed this at length, everyone here. And everyone thinks that Napa Valley is so consistent, but it really does vary quite a bit from year to year. The growing conditions, 2019 was cool in the spring, fairly moderate temperatures over the summer. And so I get a great aroma of black pepper in this wine.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Brooks definitely hit all the big topics there for where this black pepper is coming from. It's definitely those little, it's the green berries, but they're more like a pink. They're a little underripe, and so a lot of that spicy character can come from those. But we do get asked the question, like, are we taking black pepper and just adding it into the wine? We should add more of that because they really like it. But that's not the case. We are literally just handed these grapes, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a stronger of aroma. Sometimes it's a little bit more leaning more towards ripe fruit. And so it's really a vintage to vintage thing. And we're blessed to really work with such great fruit from Ashley and Black Sears.
Very lucky about that. Well, Joshua Teeters just asked us if we're going to be making another How Mountain Zinfandel like we did in 2012, and we haven't made one since. You know, the little bit of the sad news is that a tiny bit of the Black Sears How Mountain Zin was replanted to Cabernet, and just a touch. And so I don't know, maybe there could be a Black Sears Cabernet at some point in the future. I hate to start a rumor like that, but it hasn't happened yet. But it is such a special place for Zinfandel, and certainly for Cabernet. Big Cabernets from How Mountain are another whole animal, aren't they, Brooks?
Yes, well, between the soils and the elevation, they tend to be very expressive and have a lot of structure. So when they're youthful, they're very youthful, but as they age, they become silky and supple and really polished wines. But you have to give them a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marc, this is another one, I think, of your favorite wines of our portfolio. Why is How Mountain such a special place for you?
Well, there's a couple different reasons. The first reason is the most genuine, is that it really is, you know, as I kind of talked about that Amador Ridge being really a standalone character in our Zin lineup. I think the Black Sears How Mountain is also a total standalone, but it's on the other side of the rainbow, you know. So I think we typically describe Zins as either jammy or they're spicy. And for those who want a little bit leaner on the jam side and a lot more fat on that spicy black peppercorns and aromatics and liveliness on that end, the Black Sears is what rings most true to them. So, you know, stylistically, completely different than all of our others. And you know, people ask all the time, you know, what's your spiciest Zin? And I think all of the staff here will automatically respond with Black Sears right away. I mean, that is, when you smell it, it's like, who missed my Caesar with a pepper grinder? You know, just amazingly expressive.
It's delicious. You know, we bottle only, I think only just one Zinfandel and Magnums, and that's this wine. And, you know, some of you out there viewing this, what would be your advice if they were to buy a Magnum or 2 or 3 of this wine? How long could they age it for, Marc?
You know, I mean, as we were kind of talking about earlier, I mean, there's no reason to think that you can't age even a 750 milliliter size bottle of Zin up to a 15-year marker. It will just be a little bit different wine, but the larger the bottle that you go, really the more preservational factors that you're going to have in play, the more fresh, the more lively the wine is going to taste, and the more years of holding time come into play as well. So if you really do love this wine and you want to have it for years to come, and you want that fresh, you know, empty cigar box and fresh cracked black peppercorns to really live through all the years, your best bet is to go into a larger format bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and this is such a special vineyard. I've opened up in the last few years some wines, some Black Sears from 87, from the 90s, and they were just spectacular. And, we keep a few of those over in the cage. A couple of you guys watching know about the cage. And so those are some special wines. So hopefully if you can have the patience, lay down a few of those bottles for the time, that you would be greatly rewarded. Well, look, we have two more Zinfandels by my count. And now we're going to head, so if we're in Howell Mountain, we're going to head a little bit southeast to Contra Costa County to the famous Duarte Vineyard. And for those that have been Sattui fans for a long time, they probably remember the Duarte Vineyard Zinfandel. There was the Duarte Vineyard Ancient Vine. And of course, we all know what happened to some of those vineyards. They got mowed under for housing, but there was a couple blocks left. And Brooks, why don't you tell us about this wine?
Well, Oakley, as you mentioned, is in Contra Costa County. It's adjacent to the Sacramento River. So it's on the north side of the county itself, just inland from San Francisco Bay along the river. And the unusual characteristics of this vineyard is all of the sand from wind blowing sand across San Francisco Bay and then depositing it there along the river, as well as the fine material that was laid down by the Sacramento River over millions of years. And so it's truly a very unique soil. It's very, very deep. There's no restriction on the roots. So in most years, it's dry farmed with, they do have a drip system if it's necessary, but most years they don't even irrigate these vines. And what I find so fun about Zinfandel, each of these locations can be so remarkably different in their profile and their character. Joe Duarte, we were buying grapes from him. Tom mentioned the old ancient vines. And like much of the Bay Area here, there has been a lot of loss of those old vineyards over years. So this is truly a unique and kind of a rare animal still to be there in Oakley. We decided to start getting fruit from Joe again. I think it was 17, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 17 or 18. At any rate, he's quite a character, fun to work with. And this is another vineyard that comes in early, I think primarily because the dry farming and the very well-drained soils. It's basically like growing vines in sand dunes. And so it's quite unique.
I just find that amazing, Brooks, that, here we're talking about growing vines and rich, loamy soils. And I was down in Oakley one winter and the wind was blowing and it just seemed the sand was almost covering up these vines. I mean, when you say a sand dune, you're not exaggerating. These vines are growing in sand and yet they thrive and they've lasted, in some cases for 100 years. I just find that really fascinating that a vine can survive, given those kinds of circumstances.
Well, it definitely makes it unique. I would describe this wine having a lot of black cherry fruit as opposed to blackberry or raspberry. It's got nice spice as well, but it has an earthy forest floor character as well. It makes it very, very complex, I think. And again, it makes it a standalone relative to a lot of our other Zinfandel.
Thank you. Well, Wink, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. I know this has always been a favorite of yours. Why do you like this one?
Well, if I can, Tom, I just happen to have a 2002 Duarte Zinfandel. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, I think the last vintage was back in 2003.
Where the heck you been hiding that?
Well, it doesn't have the capsule on it, but I guarantee you I haven't popped the cork yet.
Well, that may change shortly.
I'm thinking about it because the ullage on that is still right at the top. So I bet you there's a few people around this the Zoom might want to taste this in a little while. So we're reintroducing this to our portfolio. In fact, I think the recent release of the 2018, which is available now for purchase, is available, as I said. And there are some great Zinfandels being made from Contra Costa County. Zinfandel, Turley, Rockwall, Klein. I mean, we're looking at some really great producers, and many of the heritage vines that still exist in that area. So, I find the Duarte to be kind of soft in terms of the texture, fruity, and absolutely delicious. And I'm so happy that we've kind of brought this one back, because it really is, as Brooks said, it doesn't have that black fruit. It's more like maybe blue and purplish berry fruit, maybe it hints of floral tones on it, hints of strawberry, some cherry. It's really remarkable at this stage. I mean, this is a wine that you can really taste right now, and really find the amazingly expressiveness in this wine at this stage for a 2020. So it's been in the barrel for, Brooks, how long?
Well, this is the 19, John. So
Oh, it is the 19. I'm sorry, I thought it was a 20. Wow.
No,
So it is the 19, isn't it?
I think it's 20.
It's a 20.
Oh, my mistake. I'm sorry. I thought we were doing all 19s. Okay.
So this is a live show, everybody. Just so you know.
Will we do take two?
Tastes like a 19, but it is only a 20.
It tastes so good right now.
Yeah.
How is that possible? I mean, it's just, I agree with David. We need bigger bottles here, because this is good to go.
There's still a little, there's still a little funkiness on the nose, like it's a 20. And but I'll tell you what, the taste right now, once you get past that, Mark, don't you agree? It's pretty righteous.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in the art form of understanding futures and what'll stay, what'll go, but when we look at this, we kind of overlook that little bit of funky nose, and we're really looking at that pure fruit expression. And for those of you who don't really want to venture into the spicy part of the Zin portfolio, if you're more on the jam bomb kind of side, this is the one for you for sure. I mean, full bodied and rich in berries.
Yeah, it's right on, Mark, and it's delicious. And as far as fitting into our portfolio, I mean, I think Jason talked about the different viticultural areas that we have for Zinfandel. So this is the first Contra Costa Zinfandel as well. I mean, I think we make 3 or 4 Dry Creek Zinfandels, Russian River Valley, 3. I think there's 4 in the Napa Valley, Amador 1, and Lodi 1. So it's great to put this in the portfolio, because I think we like to make, and Brooks can correct me, Jason, you can correct me too. I think we like to make wine that tastes a little bit like the dirt they're grown in.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Wayne. It's a wine of a place. And that's why we make so many different Zinfandels. And we get so excited when we do find one of these treasures to share it. And maybe we become a little bit overzealous and looking for these special places, because we get so excited about it. But anyway, well, that's great. Well, we're running a little bit long, and so we have one wine to go. And this is our Schoolhouse Creek. And this is our last Dry Creek Zinfandel. And this is one of our newer wines to the portfolio. And we already had with the Ramazzotti and the Mounts And so, okay, we need another Dry Creek Zin, like a hole in the head. But um, Joe Ramazzotti, I think one day said, Brooks, let me take you to this vineyard. And Brooks, what did you find?
Well, as we saw on the map earlier, it's a little farther up the Dry Creek Valley than the Ramazzotti in the mounts. The soils change, but not only the soils, the slope of the hillsides are steeper, and these vines are planted on a bench land well above the Dry Creek River and River Valley. It tends to be more gravel and medium-sized stones, very well drained. And the name comes from an old schoolhouse that used to reside at the bottom of the hill. It's no longer there, from around the turn of the century. And so Joe has grew up working this vineyard and has known it for a long time. It wasn't available for some time, and then he said, hey, psst, I think I got something for you. And we went up and looked, and I fell in love with it immediately. Again, old vine, head trained, primarily dry farmed. Because it's farther up the valley and a little farther from the cooling fog and the breezes that you get lower on the valley, it tends to be a little bit warmer, but still the very cold nights. So it even though it's adjacent to the other two, it's a standout as well.
Yeah, it's really just a stone's throw from Mounts, but now Mounts is down on the right in Dry Creek Valley, and this particular vineyard is really just a little bit up in the hills. Well, let's hear from Joe Ramazzotti, who has a great story to tell about this particular vineyard. And I think you will enjoy hearing this.
Schoolhouse Creek Vineyards was the old Peterson Ranch, and I lived next door to them when we first got here from Italy in '58. And the Peterson family, Carl and Alice, took me in and as their son, and I helped them farm. I helped plant this vineyard back in '74. And then it was a natural for me to come back and farm it when the new owners bought it. This is all Zin, and then there's a little block along the road which is Petite Syrah, but this is old style Zin. The harvest, this is actually the old Mazzoni clone, Century clone, and because I remember this was all planted to rootstock, and we budded this vineyard. Well, it is a special piece. So this has never had any water except natural rainwater. There's a beautiful spring right up here above us that covers this whole hillside with water underneath. And these vines, look at them, they're still in great shape at this late in the year. And it's a very special spot. Well, the new owners didn't know anything about vineyards, so they've trusted in me to handle it right for them. And I've had, which is so lucky. Besides Sattui, I sell it to 5 different little wineries, and it's been just well received from everybody and stuff. And it's just a gorgeous spot. So just a minimal fertilizer and pruning, and always dry farm vineyard. You need to cultivate it every year, so there's no competition from the grasses and weeds. Zinfandel seems to do so much better. There's a lot of Zin on wire and drip, but not this one. We're so lucky. Again, we have such a beautiful spring, and these vines, they're called head prune vines this way. They don't overcrop them. You can't overcrop them, and that's why they last for so long. And this taproot on these vines will go down almost 20 feet searching for water, and that's about where that spring is at. So that's why they look so beautiful at this stage of the year. And they've survived through 50 years so far without any man-made water, only from natural rain. The heritage clone that was at least 100 years old, and it was. They still don't know exactly where it came from, but here in Dry Creek Valley, that was one of the main varieties planted, and most people wanted to always keep. It's a smaller clone Zinfandel, not a big bunch. And so they just love the flavor of it, and it ripens early, and it doesn't overcrop. That was another big advantage of it. After the gold rush in 1849, all the Italians, when they got here, never made any money with gold, but they saw the landscape and they loved it. So but they brought their cuttings with them. At that time, it was mostly Primitivo. We still don't know, to tell you the truth, where exactly the Zinfandel variety came from. They think it's Croatian, but the old Italians then started planting these vineyards just like the old country, because the area looks like their country. They always kept it to 2-3 tons to the acre. And head prune vines, unless you leave so many spurs, you can't overcrop them. And by keeping it that way, it just prolonged itself. It could withstand the 100 years that it has on it. This vineyard has almost 50 years on it, and they still look like fresh, young vines. No other variety can withstand, I don't know of any other variety, 100-year-old Cabernets, Chardonnays, or anything. Just Zinfandel seems to have survived this whole deal. And some of them, there are some plantings in the Sierra foothills from 1849, still viable. They call this Schoolhouse Creek Vineyards because of the creek that flows right through here by that beautiful stand of firs that flows right into the into the dry creek. And it used to be a salmon run. The salmon used to come up that creek and spawn. We're right behind us, of course, the sun sets right to the west. It is right behind us. This gets that full exposure all day long of that beautiful western exposure sun. So they get sun from the morning to the night. That's why they ripen so early, and they love this area. It was planted because of the way it was to keep the rows at a certain level. So as we drop down, there wouldn't be a complete drop off. They kind of terrace themselves. Again, the old Italians found out that Dry Creek was the perfect spot for their grapes. And they tried other varieties, Sauvignon Blanc, they tried Cabernet, they've tried everything, not at this site right here, but along Dry Creek. And they figured out after 100 years that Zinfandel seems to be, just loves it here. It does not overcrop, it ripens early, and it seems to grow very well in this environment. I think it's from the sun exposure and this soil that's here.
Well, great hearing from Joe, and I think all of you have enjoyed what he brings. He's so knowledgeable. So two things pop out for me, and maybe this is directed to Brooks and Jason. We have talked about irrigation, non-irrigation, so that's something to maybe talk about, and then just the self-regulation of canopy and fruit, and maybe speak to those two things. Is it, is dry farming the way to go, or really is it site specific?
Jason, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll start us off and you can take it from there. So when we're talking about, each vineyard is so unique and so different. You kind of have to take it vineyard by vineyard, and you have to do what's right for those plants. And in this case, this vineyard is situated in a place where it can be dry farmed. And if that's the case, then that's the way to go. It's self-regulating. You don't have to be putting in all this water, and it just kind of takes care of itself. But there are some locations that don't have this, pool of water right above it that's constantly feeding it, and you may need to use a little bit of water. And so that's when you'll put in the irrigation system, and you kind of monitor how much water each of the vines needs. So you're not just going to be dumping lots of water on the vines. You will be watching the vines and just giving them the correct amount to make it a balanced vine. And that's what makes the best fruit. So in short, I'd say it doesn't, a dry farm vineyard and an irrigated vineyard, they both can make high quality fruit. You just use these as tools to keep the vine balanced. And you can also adjust it by using different rootstock and different scions. Each of them will require different demands of water. So if you're looking to dry farm, and there is a good amount of moisture in the ground, you might use a rootstock that just, it scavenges every little bit of moisture in the ground, and you don't need to water it. Whereas if you have a lot of water already in the ground, then you might use a rootstock that doesn't pick up water as much. And so these are all just tools to be able to achieve a vine that's balanced.
Well, really well said, Jason. And we learned last night when Joe was talking about the famous Ramazzati vineyard that they have to irrigate those vines because there's not a lot of topsoil, and it gets to a certain point and those roots just really fight to go down deep, where at Schoolhouse, eventually 20, 30, 40 feet, they find water. So you don't need to irrigate. So you're right. It's really site specific. Well, Brooks, thank you for finding this site. It's become, I think, one of the new darlings here of our Zinfandel portfolio. Bob, would you say that's true, that we've had a lot of interest in this new vineyard?
This one, the Duarte, there's one that we don't have here. It's called Collins Vineyard. They have all been well received. And I'm looking at the prices of these wines for $20, $30. You can get one of these. When you buy the futures, it's just amazing that the quality of these wines is amazing. And for the price, it's the best value, especially in Napa Valley, if you ask me. Duarte is a new one for me. I love it. The Schoolhouse, I think it's a little spicy. And if you like the Black Sears, that's a nice one to have, I think. The fruit is fabulous on it. But all these new ones are really unbelievable, especially for the price.
Well, and again, it's buying these wines as futures and getting in early and getting those deposits down. It really gives, I think, a great benefit to being a member. And that's really what it's about. I'm looking at the price sheet right here. You know, the Duarte Contra Costa, $23 for the price. Yeah, Schoolhouse 31, or it's going to sell for in the mid 40s. So, again, this is our way of saying thank you to our loyal fans that we're able to share these young wines with you, and you get in early and get an advantage on pricing. Well, before we close this out, Marc, do you have a pairing with this particular wine that you might recommend?
This is bacon, Tom. This wine here has bacon written all over it, and I cannot wait until we can get a little bit more leniency in our rules around here, so I can bring the reserve tasting plus cab and bacon pairing to the table, because this is the #1 Zinfandel of ours that I would go there with. I mean, I can't think of anything better to go.
I'm with you on that. Love bacon, and you do magic with bacon, Marc.
Bacon and anything.
Yeah, that's great. Just hearing here from David Chadwick, he says, Tom, what are we tasting next weekend? These three have been great, and they really have been fun. And I have to tell you, it's been as enjoyable for us, hopefully, as it has been for you. And just to close this out, I wanted just to talk a minute here with the panel about these heritage vineyards and how precious they are. And I don't know, who wants to just jump in here? I mean, I hope all of you, when you've listened to these growers from Joel and Martine Hirsch from Pilgrim, or, from Ramazzati and all these old, from Ashley, these are people that have just said, look, we're not in it for the money, because if they were, they wouldn't be growing old vine Zinfandel. They're in it for something much greater. And this is history. And we're like with Gilson, Brooks and I were so afraid that this vineyard will go away, just like Crow Ridge, and we're at risk. And anyway, from the panel, what are some of your thoughts on this?
I can at least point to one thing that is unique about the longevity of and availability of some of the heritage clones. Back in the late 1800s, up until today, Zinfandel is typically grafted onto a rootstock by the name of St. George. And St. George is a North American rootstock. It's resistant to phylloxera, which is a soil-borne pest that will feed and really damage vines if they're not on resistant rootstock. And so it's been a great benefit for us that these old vine Zinfandels were grafted to St. George. And that's probably one of the few reasons why they're still here. Joe mentioned that you can't overcrop head-trained vines. And that's another advantage of the longevity of these vines too. So we're just really fortunate that they're still around for us to enjoy.
You know, if I can chime in on what Brooks is talking about, I think what it really comes down to is that these farmers, these growers are really choosing quality over quantity. And, you know, to have a far less yield than you could, or to grow a great varietal like Zin instead of Cab, which can, geez, fetch you 4 times as much per acre, perhaps. It's a choice. It is a conscious choice. And we are so blessed to have a number of these growers being part of the Visa Sattui team.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. I mean, I think just by looking at the vines and looking at the gnarled characteristics of them, knowing that they go back 60, 70, 100 plus years. I mean, it's history in one fashion, and it's also just, it's a little bit about who we are, what we are as vintners and as farmers. It's you know, for me, it's right here. It really is right here. It's just part of the heart of farming and the blessings we have for the folks who continue to actually farm these vineyards and take maybe a little bit of hit on the money that they might make from the vineyards as well.
Well, last night, Jason, you were talking about moss growing on the sides of these trunks. If that doesn't say it all, how special it is to have wines made from these vines, I don't know if anything else says it as strongly.
Yeah, I agree. It's just when you get out to these vineyards and you see them, you feel like you're in the giant redwoods. you almost like want to look up to them and you hope to one day be able to see the world through their eyes and see all the things that they've seen. And it's not only, I mean, yeah, these things get old, up to 100 years old, but it's also calling them heritage. These vines were originally from another vineyard that were probably 100 years old. And then those vines were probably from another vineyard from another 100 years old. So the actual DNA in these vines just date back so far that you could be tasting the same type of fruit that, you know, these vintners were growing back in like the 1900s. It's really, really neat. And if we were to get rid of these, I think it would be a shame, and we would be losing a piece of history.
Well, thank you to all our viewers and all our fans that have been supporting, purchasing these old vine ZINS, because without you buying these wines, then we can't continue making them. And as you've seen the stories, you know, from Fran and Lisa, a young, you know, a couple looking for a little piece of paradise in Sonoma County and wanting to preserve history. If it wasn't for people like them, you know, this would be lost to history. So anyway, we enjoy this. These wines are very, very special, and I hope you've enjoyed the tastings here. The last 3 tastings. And Marc, if you can bring this home for us. I know we've had some tremendous sales already on futures, and there's probably some people who are going to jump on some of these wines tonight. But anything you can add to that?
I mean, it's time, you guys, and now's the best time of year to get on them. So this is your sneak peek, your privilege to be the first in on it. So I know that I've already, just during this tasting, have amassed a pile of orders and texts that are coming in, combined, you know, with last weekend. So if you were someone who got in on our Bordeaux and Cabernets on futures, you know, get in on the ZINS and the Rhone varietals, because now is the time, and you're never going to get, number one, better pricing, but a more genuine view on these wines.
Well, and it's okay if you'd rather pay a lot more money after they're bottled. That would be okay, I think, with Dario and I. But if you want a little bit better deal, jumping in on the futures is great. Well, I thank you to you guys. This has been a lot of fun for us. Hopefully, all of you watching have enjoyed this. You know, Jason, Brooks, Mark, Bob, and Wing, thank you for your expertise here tonight, and for the last really last three tastings. I have to thank Allie. You know, she was the one that really put this. Yeah, let's give it up for Allie behind the scenes. She really put this whole thing together, and all the screen shares and videos, and Abby that did all the video editing, and you know, and we even had these videos. They were taped by our Michelin star chef Stefano Massanti. This has really been a family effort to put this together. And we talked earlier about, you know, Greg and his team, you know, bottling up 3,000 of these little bottles and then wrapping each one in bubble pack and then getting them all to you. But a lot of great information, you know, that hopefully you all have enjoyed. And we can't wait to see you here at the winery. And we're open, and things are getting better. The numbers are really getting a lot better here in California. And we're just so looking forward to a memorable 2021 and then a great harvest. So thank you to all of you. Salute.
Salute.
Yeah, get your orders in fast. We're going to hold the allocations until Monday. So you have until Monday. Get a hold of your either if you have an outbound rep or call Deanna. I think we have all the information that we've given you. We'll hold the allocations for you, but after that, you know, all bets are off. Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Farewell.
Cheers.
Farewell.
Bye.